So tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do.
I'm Carolyn Yackel. I'm a math professor at Mercer University.
You found out about the gathering. You came here 6 times ago, which would be 12 years ago was your first one, right?
Right.
So what was your expectation sort of coming in? Did you know what you were getting into?
Not at all. No, I didn't know anything about it.
You didn't know anything about
No,
it?
I didn't know
So
anything
you
about
showed
it.
up completely just blank slate.
Yes.
And then tell me, just sort of walk me through that experience. Like what did it feel like?
Oh my gosh, it was overwhelming. And I'm an academic, so I'm used to totally academic events, and not everybody was an academic. And the tenor was very different then. It was much more of a male event. And so now it's really changed. It's very much more balanced. And so, so it was very different, that first one. Well, it was 7. So there was a lot about the phanoplane, which was really interesting. I think that it was a little bit overwhelming, I think, the first one, because there was a lot of, there was just so much math that I didn't know. I think that's a really interesting thing about recreational math is that once you get into the recreational math community, you're introduced to all these ideas that then sort of everybody knows them. But before that, you don't know those ideas. Even though you're a PhD mathematician, you have no idea what people are talking about at all. But I remember at that first one, I sat down. People are really nice. So you sit down next to these people and you don't know who they are at all. Well, I sat down next to Slavik Joblin. Do you know who that is? He's a very famous mathematical artist. He's no longer living, unfortunately. But and I knew his work from the joint math meetings. And so I sat down next to him, and then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting next to this guy. And I think that's one of the really amazing things about coming here, is you sit down next to someone and you're like, oh. So I had a postdoc at Indiana University, which we were just talking about. And Chaim Goodman-Strauss came and gave a talk about this aperiodic tiling system of L tiles. Well, it was actually something else, but to me it just looked like L tiles. And so then at G4G9, I was like, what am I gonna do that has to do with 9? Because I always want to have something to do with the number, as people do, you know. And so I had been wanting to make, I like ceramics, so I wanted to make these ceramic tabletops that would kind of give the idea of the aperiodic tiling, but also the idea of how reptiles are kind of like fractals, but they're also kind of not like fractals. So I got to finally do this idea that I'd been thinking about from Chaim's talk from like 10 years earlier, finally at that. But so like I met Chaim finally at a G4G. So that to me is like the biggest thing about G4Gs is there are these people who are your heroes, and then you finally meet them and they're so nice.
Wow. So other than him, what were some of the other people that you met through Gardner that stood out as well?
Oh, well, so many people, but I can't give a list because it's like 50 people.
Sure. Do you have a sort of a memory of sitting with some of them or having interactions or some of the things you talked about?
Oh my gosh, like Saul Golem. Like he's like a great example. Like, oh my gosh, after I gave the talk about my L tiles, I had made a conjecture that was like so totally false, it's like completely embarrassing. Oh my gosh. And so, but interestingly, after that, then a bunch of people came up to me and they're like, oh, so some people were like, oh, that was totally false. Here's an example. And then some people came up to me and like, oh, I think I can prove it, blah, 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 which is awesome, right? Mm-hmm. So that is just fun. I like that because people are okay, first of all, with you being wrong, but also they'll be like, okay, I want to talk about your thing, right? But then the best part was I went back and sat at my table after my talk. And it just happened I was sitting next to him. And he, of course, was the one that introduced reptiles in the first place. And then the very next thing that happened was he wrote me this lovely little note about how I was wrong and gave me the counterexample and then signed his name at the bottom. And I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, you know? But he was so nice about it, right? So, like, that's another great example. Yeah.
So you were talking a little bit about recreational mathematics. Yeah. Now, I didn't know what that meant until I came here and started to see it.
Me neither.
And I try to explain this to my friends that don't know anything about it. Right. And seems like two conflicting ideas, recreation and mathematics. So what's sort of your definition and your experience? How would you explain it to other people?
I think one part of it is it can be math that comes up as a consequence of games or things that are recreational. So, for example, flexagons are like game-like things, and then you start thinking of the math behind it. Or, pentominoes, that kind of thing. They're like game-like things you're playing, and then you're like, oh, wait, what's really going on? And I think that's kind of a good way to think about it, because I think that a lot of times people think recreational math means that you're not doing serious math. And that can be really dangerous for mathematicians, because if they talk to their colleagues about it, then they're like, oh, that's not real then. But that's not what it means.
Right. And so what are some of your favorite examples of recreational mathematics that you've come across?
So just for me, here, like because of coming here, then I found out about flexagons and started working on flexagons. Those are really super fun.
Do you have a vision for the younger generation sort of getting into recreational math and all of these things that we gather for? How do you think we can inspire them and sort of turn them on to these sort of things the way that Martin inspired us?
A lot of what this conference is about for me is about communicating math to each other, but thinking about really interesting mathematics and how one might communicate it to people who aren't mathematicians at all.
And then do you have any like favorite memories of the last 6 gatherings or anything that sort of sticks out, little stories in your mind or?
Well, my very favorite part of all of the conferences is these sculpture building parts. They're so fun, and I think you learn so much by just trying to build stuff. It's just amazing. I just love it so much.
I think we all do. So,
Yeah.
well, thank you for sharing with
Thank
us.
you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.